Good morning. I thank the organizers and particularly Professor Inbar for inviting me back to the BESA Center, and thank you also for the kind introduction. I have to warn you, in comparison with what Professor Spiro told us, my presentation is very dull. I will only give you an overview of the military and political-military relations between our two countries, and it's just a sober survey. I've been watching that for some time because in 2007, the Berlin head of the American Jewish Committee, Deidre Berger, asked me at very short term for a contribution for a little book on German-Israeli relations, and I was to write about the military relations. And I said to myself, I know nothing, or I don't know very much about it. But then, of course, as a general staff officer, we have learned to become an expert in a new subject within 24 hours. So after 2 weeks, I wrote that article, and I went back to it when I prepared my notes for today. Israel's relations with Germany in the military and security policy fields have to do with the starting point of the bilateral relationship. Beyond Germany's historical responsibility, the desire for peace and stability in the Middle East, for peaceful living together of Israelis and Palestinians in two states, above all, however, for recognition of the right of safe existence of the State of Israel. Its right of assured security is in Germany's national interest and was said to be part of Germany's raison d'etat by Chancellor Merkel. These basic convictions have formed German-Israeli security and military relations, which are embedded in the formal diplomatic relationship sealed 50 years ago. Politico-military and military relations between our countries are particularly intense and trustful. They have a long-term character and are independent of the political constellations in both countries. The annual cooperation programs are the most voluminous with any country in the world for Germany. Witness to this are not least the high-level visits. Minister von der Leyen marked the 50th anniversary year of diplomatic relations by a visit in May to Tel Aviv and Haifa. The Israeli defense minister was in Germany in January last year. Since 2003, there has been a strategic dialogue at the level of state secretaries, last in December 2014 in Berlin and envisaged for this winter in Tel Aviv. The chiefs of defense did not meet last year, but in the years before. And this will continue. In several fields and at different levels, there are staff talks down from the level of the politico-military directors, since 2014 also among the J5 community. All this happens on the basis of two bilateral agreements, 2001 about mutual access to classified information, and 2008 about the entire field of training and education. Since 2008, activities between the German and the Israeli Ministries of Defense and Armed Forces are bound together in annual programs. In 2014, that program comprised 70 individual measures, while for 2015, this year, 72 are planned. The planning is always very ambitious, and in the course of a year, some of the projects are cancelled for budgetary or administrative reasons, but that does not diminish what I said before. It is the largest program we have with any country in the military field. One new cooperation project, just for illustration, in this year deals with personnel wounded in action and with the post-traumatic syndrome, PTBS, the post-traumatic syndrome. Yeah. This example illustrates that our armed forces can learn a lot from each other. So below the political and the politico-military level, there is an extensive exchange of information and experience, and this goes for all three services, although between the ground forces it is most intense. Regular army staff talks and training exchanges, of which I will give some illustrative examples later. Since 1989, Air Force staff talks and the same between the navies. All this not only at the top level, but among experts of various specializations. Cooperation in the military medical field has not been comparably intense, but since 2007, for instance, a German medical officer has been attending courses at the Israeli Military Medical School. Since 1983, Israel can claim what we call military training assistance in principle, but it has not made use of that for some years. It is, after all, a developed country with a state-of-the-art military. So in the field of training, there are mainly programs for which Israel is charged and which take place in the context of armament purchases. Let me give you a quick overview of what is planned in the annual program for this year. 5 Milpol and staff talks, 25 expert meetings, 16 information visits, 13 personnel exchanges, conferences and seminar participation in 9 cases, exercise participation in 5 cases, and also a lecturer lent out. All this concerns the Army in 21 cases, the Air Force in 14, the medical service in 9, and the Navy in 3 cases. Or to talk of subjects, among those are officer and staff officer education and training, logistics, protocol matters, armaments, troops psychology, NBC defense, protection, geo-info, force planning, personnel, press work. You can imagine that such detailed programs have to be handled in a flexible way, and the balance sheet at the end of the year is not congruent with the plan at the beginning. And frequently the initial expectations are higher than what can be realized, also because of defense cuts and operational requirements, particularly on the Israeli side. For this year, the tendency of realization, i.e. the conduct of the envisaged measures, is said to be more positive than in previous years. As former director of the faculty of the German Command and Staff College, the Führungsakademie in Hamburg, I would of course like to see Israeli participation, as in earlier years, in the non-NATO General Staff Officers course at Hamburg, but somehow this does not seem to fit into the career scheme of Israeli officers. The constant offer is there, though, and particularly in this course, where almost the whole world is represented. In Hamburg they call it the Little United Nations. Participants are not only at the receiving end, but they also contribute, not least in the interest of their home country. Since 2006, Germany sends almost annually an officer to the 11-month International Fellows Program at the Israeli National Defense College in Tel Aviv. A large part of training programs have, of course, to do with submarines delivered to Israel by Germany. For instance, over 100 Israeli personnel trained in sea rescue operations. On the other hand, there was training of Bundeswehr's CH-53 helicopter pilots, CSAR, combat search and rescue personnel, Heron, reconnaissance drone crews, etc. And Israeli jet crews were trained in centrifuges at the German Flight Medical Institute. But I do not want to get totally lost in expert details. So let me finish with a few illustrative examples and with some general remarks. One example, since many years, Israel is, like the USA, France and the UK, included in what we call Bestenförderung, in army officer training. This means opportunities for particularly qualified young officers to participate for 1 or 2 weeks in training programs in those countries. It used to be called PFIF when General Wittmann, Army Chief until 2001, promoted particularly the program in Israel. His nickname, incidentally, was Tiger Willy, and he had particular sympathy with Israeli army soldiers and their practical experience. Since 2011, the program is called Profile, and it is indicative that Israel continues to be one of the partners beside the big allies. Second example, the other day in a conference I sat beside a long retired German colonel whom I had known for a long time. And when he heard that I would talk at the Besa Center about this subject, he produced many reminiscences because he had been in the army staff under General Wittmann. And one thing he remembered particularly well was the introduction of tracker dogs, sniffing dogs, into certain Bundeswehr units belonging to the Special Forces Command and the parachute troops. This going back to experience with tracker dogs made in the Israeli Defense Forces. The third example is a very recent one. Just a month ago, during the second half of October, more than 100 Bundeswehr infantry soldiers in group and platoon formations, together with their light arms and heavy equipment and medical personnel, participated in training at the Urban Warfare Center in Selim, here in Israel. In this context, Israeli participation at the Sniper Symposium at the German Infantry School in Hammelburg is also noteworthy. Two remarks about armament cooperation between our two countries and arms exports to Israel follow the political principles of the federal government for the export of war weapons and other armament goods, that is the long title, which are rather restrictive, as you may know, and include the prohibition of the export of such goods into what is called areas of tension. Still, Israel has a privileged place, and analogous to the strategic dialogue and the staff talks on the military side, there exists on the basis of a bilateral framework agreement of 1998 an armaments panel that oversees the cooperation in research and technological matters. For illustration, I mentioned the following areas of mutual interest: sensor technology against ballistic missiles, protection for land vehicles, mine detection, convoy protection. Important individual programs include the submarine project Dolphin, target illumination for the Tornado airplane, the temporary lease of Patriot systems to Israel in the past, and the employment of Israeli Heron reconnaissance drones by the Bundeswehr in Afghanistan. In view of the high performance standards of the IDF, their combat experience and their skills in fighting terrorists in asymmetrical situations, Israel is a particularly attractive partner for the Bundeswehr. But also bringing people in uniform together continues to be a very central aspect, not least against the background of history and Germany's aforementioned particular responsibility towards Israel. This includes the remembrance culture, which is also part of our officer education. On the internet, I looked up a speech that I had the honor to make in front of the annual convention of the American Jewish Committee in Washington in May 2004, and where I explained and illustrated the way in which we in the Bundeswehr remember the Nazi crimes, the abominable Nazi crimes which do not fill us, the generation born after the end of the so-called Third Reich, with collective guilt, but still with some collective shame, and certainly with collective responsibility. This coming together of people in the framework of the military relations is well illustrated by the visit of the frigate Schleswig-Holstein already a couple of years ago in October 2004 to the port of Haifa. The then German ambassador Rudolf Dressler reported on a very cordial welcome, joint exercises and a full week togetherness, but above all about a visit of 30 German officers, NCOs and rank and file to Yad Vashem, where, accompanied by 30 Israeli Navy soldiers, they laid down a wreath in the Hall of Holocaust Remembrance. Then they met for a long conversation. Family biographies, German and Israeli history, today's Germany and Israel after 4 years of intifada were evoked, the ambassador reported, to my knowledge, for the first time in this form. Finally, I believe that the Israeli-German military relationship has a good and solid future, and that present concerns must be part of them. And the qualitative content could include the discussion conducted at NATO and also in the German White Book process about the so-called comprehensive approach to security, for I believe that also in Israel it becomes increasingly clear that security cannot be solely based on military power indefinitely. In any event, security in the Middle East and Israel's assured, protected, and in the long run recognized existence continue to be for Germany of vital importance. And the intensity of the bilateral military relations is not least an expression of our solidarity. Thank you very much.